So we're continuing now with our look at this very interesting Amorite text and what it has to teach us a little bit about the world of Abram and Sarah and some of the world of later Israel. We looked at the first 8 names of gods and goddesses that are listed on here. The 9th name is a name Pidrai, which is not really mentioned in the Bible. So there are a couple of places that this deity appears, this goddess appears elsewhere outside the Bible, but I'm going to just move on to the next, the last of the god names, and that's a name that also doesn't appear in the Bible, Ashti ul Kalti. But the interesting thing about this is that it's generally recognized as an Elamite name from the land of Elam. Now, Elam is in what is today southwestern Iran, in and around there. So this is as far away from Israel as you get. This is like over 1,000 miles away and is very, very distant. But the interesting thing about this, and to me the exciting thing about this, is that Elam, though it doesn't appear too often in the Bible, does appear already in Genesis 14. Remember that story where Abram goes to rescue Lot and his family after they have been captured and taken hostage, along with the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, by a coalition of kings from different parts of the ancient Near East. There is Tidal, king of the nations, as it's called, the Goyim, which is probably, it's a good name, even known at this time, at the time of Abram, as a Hittite name from the Hittite culture up in Turkey. There is another name that may be connected with Amraphel, with the Babylonian culture and Babylon at that time. And then there is Kedorlaomer, who is clearly connected as the leader of this coalition, connected with Elam there in Genesis 14. Now, Elam doesn't appear too often and hardly ever as an adversary or enemy of Israel because it's so far away. But what's interesting is it's mentioned in Genesis 14. It's mentioned here in these texts as a god associated with the Amorites. Now, this tablet probably comes from south of Babylon, so not as far as some might be from Elam, but still that it is connected with these other gods suggests some cultural connection. And this is the only time in the history of the ancient Near East when it was possible for a group of people led by an Elamite king to come out of Elam and to reach across the Fertile Crescent and all the way over to near Israel. In fact, we know this from the 18th century BC documents and letters we have from the city of Mari, which is on the Euphrates River. Today it lies just at the border between Iraq and Iran. And we have some, one of our background shot or picture is that of the area of Mari, right on the Euphrates River. And that's what you're looking at here. And what's so interesting about it is that it's only, as I said, only at this time that a group like the Elamites would come that far across. They're known to come west of the Euphrates in the Mari text, and they're known to come even farther than that, close and not that far away from where Abram would have lived. What we find is, therefore, that this is the only time. Later on, after 1500 BC, right down through the rest of the Old Testament period and beyond, for that matter, the whole ancient Near East is split up into different states and nations and empires, and you never have the Elamites, would they be able to break through all of that military power. They just didn't have the strength. But at this period, they did, and because of the configuration of city-states and other things here and there, it was possible for them to come right across this region, and we see it. So this reminds us that even in a case where this God is not at all mentioned, there is something important going on with that king, and very, very important. Well, divine names. We've now looked at these 10 divine names. Dagon, Asherah, Yarok, Roshoth, Anat, and Chemosh can be found as deities or as common nouns in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible. So these are already known to exist and already in the time of Abram. The common noun, Chalamu, is probably related to Alma, as the masculine Chalamu to the feminine Alma, young woman, even virgin, in Isaiah 7:14 and elsewhere in the Old Testament. Other deities are also known outside of the Bible, and this includes every deity except the last one who has the Elamite connection. So a lot of interesting things going on there, but I want to move now to another section where we have groups of words rather than just single names of gods. We now have groups which are blessings. And there's a lot of different phrases. It's as though you were going to a foreign country and had a phrase book to learn the language a little bit, to say hello, what can I order here? Where is the restroom? And, all those kinds of questions. So that is what we have here, only it's not quite a phrase book for travelers.
And what is a blessing? For example, in my mom's house, there's an Irish blessing, and it's kind of like a bunch of flowery but really poetic and nice to read wishes, but there doesn't seem to be any power behind it. Right. But then in the Hebrew Bible, like in Psalm 1, blessing seems to come with this connotation of fruitfulness in like a very holistic way.
Yeah. Well, and is that the one where may the road rise up to greet you as you
go?
Yeah, it's a well-known Irish blessing. Mm-hmm. It's a really neat one. Well, what's interesting is in the Old Testament and in the Bible, blessings and still in among Christians and others, blessings are believed to have a certain power or ability, as they are a kind of prayer in which God is invoked to bless or to do favor towards you, to be gracious and good towards you, to give you something that is good. And so this is a sort of prayer connected also with directed towards another person for blessing. And it's true. In the Old Testament, some of the most wonderful texts are these blessings. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lift up his countenance to you. May the Lord give you peace. That's the blessing of the high priest Aaron that he was supposed to give to all the nation of Israel in Numbers 6. There are similar ones like that.
In secular scholarship, there's this sense that speech act theory, that a speech leads to some kind of accomplishment, some kind of act. So you just said this beautiful Aaronic prayer. When I think of those things, I usually get this sense of, oh, this is how God feels about me. When we say blessings, does it accomplish something? Is it different than what people would say in sociology of speech act theory? We speak it out and then there's an effect, or...
I think speech act theory still is alive and working. I mean, the usual famous example of that is for the pastor to say, I now pronounce you husband and wife. That's usually understood as the moment at which the couple is married or recognize themselves as married if they're believers. And so it does do something like that. But blessings, and the opposite of that, by the way, is curses,
right?
Where you invoke God to do something bad for someone. But blessings are in that general sphere, but they're more specific because they're directed towards God as a prayer. So if you ask me, does it do something? Well, do prayers do something?
Yeah.
And if prayers do something, as they do, sometimes we see it, sometimes we are not. So it's not so immediate or visible, but so do blessings then. But it comes with faith, and it comes within the community of the people of God. And they have been there and are there. They're an important part of faith. Even in church services, pastors will often give blessings to the congregation, sending them forth.
So a blessing is kind of like a pronouncement where there's something that's kind of sealed in a sense, like I pronounce you husband and wife, but it's also kind of a prayer to God.
Yeah, well, it's a prayer that God does this.
It's a
prayer that may God do this. It's less of I'm going to do this to you now. There's something that by my saying this is magically it does it. It's may God give you good things, grace and mercy. That's the blessing. Well, let's look at some examples. We don't have a blessing from the Old Testament, but we do have blessings that are of that sort. So an example comes from line 30 of the first tablet, which is written in a certain way, but is translated, the Amorite is Liquicha Dingir, or the word that's the sign, it's a symbol sign for God. May the God, preserve your life. Now, that's a wonderful blessing. May God preserve your life. We still have it, and we see it in the Bible. Similar, even the blessing of Aaron in some ways is that, to make you alive, to give you life and to continue that life. And in fact, in this example from line 30, the word for give life or preserve your life is the word we have in Hebrew for that. Chawaya or Chawa. In fact, the word of Eve, the name Eve and Adam and Eve, comes from this word. It is the word Chawa, and sometimes you'll hear in modern Israeli names of women. That's the corresponding Hebrew name for Eve that we use, but it means one who gives life, giver of life. And so this is a particularly designed blessing that God may give life to a person. And another one from line 31, Napsacha Larshi Dinger, again the word for the sign for God, but may the God keep you well. This is not so much preserving your life, but giving you enhanced life, to give you great life, to give you strength, to give you vigor and vitality, give you health and well-being. And the word for that health and well-being, napsah, is from nephesh, is not from, but is related to the Hebrew word nephesh, which is the word sometimes translated soul. It's probably better understood as vitality, the life within us, that not just spiritual but also physical life. It's the whole together. They aren't separated. And so these are kind of really neat little blessings like this.
Before we move on to the next part in sacrifice, blessing, you said something interesting there. It's not as though it's like a magical spell where you're pronouncing something. You know, there's major traditions within Christianity, maybe, for example, Catholicism, where there seems to be a power designated to the priest or the priesthood so that they can accomplish something through a pronouncement. And then in charismatic circles, often there's this sense of I'm claiming my authority in Christ because I have this status before God. I can claim this and then that will happen. Is that a little bit too far? Is it more of a possibility if God grants it? It's not as much a power that we legally have as Christians, or this priesthood gives us this ability?
Well, I want to be very careful here because it's easy to get into, and I don't want to criticize other traditions because of what they do.
Neither do I.
I certainly think there are people within it who may begin to move over and use it as a kind of magical thing. But ultimately, in Christianity of any of its different varieties, it is up to God to make that decision. Now, certainly, priests in Catholic and other traditions are recognized figures, and they have recognized to have on them a certain a gift from God, a certain spiritual fullness or fulfillment, which enables them to do enables them to appeal. I would say enables them to appeal to God, if it's done in the right way and in the right spirit, in such a way that that for their flock or their congregation, God can hear them. And in the charismatic tradition, there is this, yes, claiming certain things from God, and we can claim promises from God, but we have to be very careful how we, and the spirit in which we do that, because it's not simply, well, we can trounce around and make this claim, make that claim, make another claim, and God is obligated somehow to follow through on that. It's our coming with the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit of God, which we then, through that Spirit, are able to pray to God. But what is that Spirit? It begins with humility. It begins with coming before God in such a way that we recognize that we are appealing to Him for a blessing or something else. But as we are doing that, it's really in His hands.
So there is a sense of office that can accomplish something on behalf of a congregation. It's not to go too far to say that's irrelevant.
No. And even more so, I think the Old Testament teaches us that there is a sense in which those who follow God, there are those who have righteousness by their life and by their character, by who they are, less as an office and more as simply a righteousness. Ezekiel several times speaks of judgment that is coming upon the people of God, and it says if even Noah or Job or Daniel were here, they would not be able, their prayers and their intercession would not be able to turn back this judgment. But you get it in James in the New Testament, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And James knew this, and others did too. So there is a tradition within the scriptures that those who walk closely to God have a connection with God to intercede. And those who do pray and do seek God, that's part of the blessing that they have. And they're more likely, because maybe they know a little bit more about God, they're more likely to pray in accordance with the will of God.
Okay, that makes more sense. So it is really about the righteousness of the person, and they may happen to have an office, but the pattern we see, like in Ezekiel, is like even if these righteous people like Job praise on your behalf, like I would not hear them because, and it seems to suggest that their prayer really matters. Just like in James, the righteous man's prayer really matters. And just briefly, and want to hand it back to you to move on, is what is bound on earth is bound in heaven. What is loosed on earth is loosed in heaven. Is that connected to blessing?
Well, I think there too, there is this sense of in seeking God's will. And from that will of God, that there may come certain things that would be bound and held back. I think powers of evil and of darkness are bound, and what is and what you proclaim released on earth. And I think again, it's something similar with the blessings, encouragement, fruitfulness, grace. That these things would be released, and just the presence of the Spirit. So,
well, thanks so much, Dr. Hess.
That's all going on there. So, yeah, it's a really important area, and let's go on. And I think we have reference to sacrifice, as you say, in Tablet 2. Remember, there are 2 tablets, and the second one has a number of phrases on that are in Amorite, and one of these is Bikratia Zabacha Ana Dingirya or Elia Lamti Namtin. And this says, I will make a sacrifice to my God. And what's interesting about this is that you have these words for sacrifice like Bikratia. A sacrifice is the same as in Hebrew, Bikurtu. It's a word for first fruits there. And so it's a kind of sacrifice. The word to sacrifice, zabacha, is in fact in Hebrew as zevach. And it means a sacrifice, a slaughter of an animal before God that the people may enjoy the meal that comes from it. And even to the word to make, let me do, is again very closely related, lamtin, to natan, to give in Hebrew. So a lot of these words come through in Hebrew later on. It's so interesting. And the same way with then in line 23, where there's a reflection, then my God should show me favor. Eli, my God, nikmatam, favor. I keep wanting to say flavor, getting hungry. Lir shiani, which is to show favor. But what's interesting here, the word for favor is nikmatan, which is closely related to the Hebrew nikama, and that means comfort or encouragement, nacham. And it occurs for the first time, it occurs hundreds of times, or over 100 times in the Bible, occurs for the first time in Genesis 5, where Lamech, the father of Noah, when Noah is born, he named him Noah. And he said, he will comfort us in our labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. So Noah is a word similar, Noach. That word is similar to Nacham, to give comfort, and that's the word Lamech actually uses there. So already early in the Bible, this word is used for comfort and encouragement.
Wow.
So number of words that we have appearing with regards to blessing. Well, in conclusion, as I wrap this up, and we've just talked about a lot of different things here, but you see the way in which a text like this sheds some light and it helps us to understand a little bit better, sometimes to recover or to go over ground that was already studied elsewhere, but now with new insights, a little bit of a new understanding from these important texts. With their divine names, blessings, and sacrificial terms, here for the first time in common nouns as well as whole phrases, these provide important insight into the religious background of the world of Genesis 12 to 37 and the early period of Abram and his family. From these beliefs and traditions, and also in distinction from them, like the other gods and goddesses here, would come the faith remembered as part of Abram and Sarah and their children and grandchildren in Genesis and then beyond into the rest of the Old Testament.
Would you consider giving us a blessing of comfort and favor?
Let's do the blessing of Aaron. That sounds like a good one to conclude with. So, please receive this blessing. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'kuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May he show his face and shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his face unto you and give to you peace. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hess.
For sure. Thank you.